Hello, hello to my True Blue crew. Here on a Whip Wednesday, we are tackling those UFOs. We want to get those projects done and turn them into useful quilts and finished objects. So, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to say hello in the chat and like this video. I'm anxious to hear about your sewing projects as well. I took a vote in my last video about what to do with the snippets from Cotton Cuts. I have been working on a couple different Cotton Cuts projects, and the one that first got me hooked on their pre-cut kits is the Floral States of America. I love a good map, and I love the different aspects of the United States. I've traveled, I've lived in a bunch of different states. And so when I saw that line of fabric and heard that Cotton Cuts was doing a block of the month related to all 50 states, it sounded really fun. So I jumped right in. Hi, Kathy. Nice to see you across the country in New York. I am in Arizona, and so our state fabric has cactus on it. The saguaro cactus is our state flower. They have these really pretty big blooms. They almost look like daisies sitting on top of the cactus when they bloom in the spring. So let me tell you what's going on. Cotton Cuts let us know that the month 5 block was not going to be sent out on time. They had some delays with their fabric. So we got this little note. Breaking news from Cotton Cuts. Happy sewing, floral enthusiast. As promised, we're including parts and pieces for your special bonus block month. We hope that you enjoy these triangles and squares from your home state and can't wait to see your creativity flow. And they are encouraging people to share online. So I took the little snippets, like they said. They sent me some various triangles and square pieces, and it was just free reign. Whatever you can do with those fabrics, make an extra block. So I put the challenge out. I came up with 2 different designs, and I included those in last Saturday's video. And then they tell us that they're planning to send 2 months together on November 1st. So in a few weeks, I should have another 10 blocks ready to sew from Cotton Cuts for the Floral States of America. So I just thought that was a wonderfully generous and creative way to kind of make lemonade from the lemons of these shipping delays. And the popular choice for my snippets, my bonus block, was to turn it into a cactus. So, you could do a lot of different things with this bunch of triangles, but I wanted to use most of what they gave me, and I just thought that was a fun choice. So I'm going to sew these little pieces into those rows, and we'll see what my little improv cactus turns out to be. I've got it all laid out there just on a scrap of batting to make that kind of impromptu design board. And you can see a little bit of my sewing machine there. And the great thing about these pre-cut triangles, since they take off the dog ears, everything lines up just beautifully. and you don't have to worry about it at all. As long as I pick them up in the right order as I'm sewing here, since this is a totally improv design, I don't really have a better way to figure it out. And the one problem with these cactus on this fabric is that they are directional. So you can see, and what, there's no way for the pre-cut folks to worry about the direction of the cactus when they're cutting, because how do you know where this piece will end up? So you can get kind of crazy with all the different cactus going in different directions there. But I tried to keep most of it lined up. But there's a few pieces that are going to be going sideways. So let me know, would you purposefully scramble all the pieces so that the cactus point different directions? Or would you try to keep it going all in one direction? And then I am going to finger press all of these rows. So we'll see. I'm not real sure how that part will work out. We'll just let it go. And this, this may end up really short and squat, looking like a prickly pear instead of a saguaro maybe, but we're just having fun with it. So and to get the arms going, I couldn't use the long edge of the triangle. So part of it's gonna have to get all trimmed down funny. So we'll deal with that when we get to that part of it. Okay, working on the base of the triangle, or the base, the main body of the cactus is actually what I am working on here. When they first said they were sending us fabric from our home state, I thought I would get a strip, maybe 6.5 by the width of fabric of this cactus print. And I was imagining, doing my own thing. And then I get this assortment of rectangles and triangles. And I kind of had to stop for a second and rethink my options to come up with a design that used pre-cut pieces instead of yardage that I could do my own thing with. This is what I mean with the cactus going in wonky directions. And this side piece is what I mean about how it will have to get trimmed even. And this is going to be a very tall, skinny block. And I didn't bring a cutting mat over. So we'll have to trim as best we can with scissors. Let's see how that works out. I suppose I could have just made one big, long, tall cactus because a lot of saguaros look like that. They're just the one body without the arms branching off. Hi, Tasha. Got all my New York friends here tonight. You guys stay up late. I was yawning at 8 o'clock last night and didn't really have to stay awake for anything. So obviously I needed some sleep. Okay, here's the long body of my cactus, and you can see the triangles they sent to us. Got everything finger pressed as well as I can. Okay, I am, like I said, I didn't bring a cutting mat over here by my machine. I'm going to do the best I can to trim that excess with scissors. You know what? With improv blocks, you don't have to be perfect. And with seams in general, you don't have to be perfect. Ooh, that turned out pretty nice though. On that side, I'm going to leave this side jagged until I get the whole thing done. Okay, so that guy goes in like that. Hi, Crystal. Thanks for joining us. I am just working on an improv little extra bonus block for my cotton cuts project. And it also seems very silly to be sewing the same color fabrics together to make a larger piece, but they didn't send me very many squares. They sent me a lot of triangles. So I thought about making a star block, but everybody wanted to see a cactus. So I am sewing the cactus. Sewing flying geese with pre-cuts is also very, very nice when those corners just go so nicely together. And the one thing I'm going to have to do is fudge a little bit on the top part of this block because there's a gap in my piecing that I will want to be straight across. So I'll have to figure that out here in a minute. Let me get all the sewn parts ready, and then we can figure out where I need to fill in. Up. There's the other arm of the cactus. Okay. So here's the deal. I'm just going to spread this out a little bit so you can see the pieces. Okay, so I've sewn the three main columns together. I have this bit of white that I was going to put across the top here. So that leaves a little gap there that I can fill in with one of the squares. But then I only have one more white square, and so I'd still have a little gap up on the top there. I do have some extra large triangles, so I could like cut those down to fill in so that the top of my cactus is all white. Or I could just leave that off, put these two squares of white and just, trim it even right there. So what do you think? It probably I can add white later to make it a square block to put on the back, or I could leave it like this. We'll leave it like this for the moment and call it good when we get the 3 rows together. Okay. So now I've got my long arm that I can, and they're almost exactly the same size. So that works out pretty well. I'm just going to pin in the middle here to keep things even as I get started. I wanted a seam to lay flat, and it is sewing open, so let me So it was kind of funny today at work. They have what they call engagement hours, where it's just somebody comes in and does a presentation. We've had, a local museum gave us a walkthrough of a current exhibit. Sometimes it's more related to the agency that I work for. Well, today they brought in a paranormal investigator who researches haunted places in Arizona. And she has the wildest photography of these times when she has been in places and been contacted by the spirits. So I don't know how much you believe in paranormal activity, but she definitely has photographic proof that looks, natural. It doesn't look like it's some kind of Hollywood prop. But I don't know that I'd go so far as to take part in one of her investigation walkthroughs because she conducts these tours. Oh my gosh, everybody's talking about their connections to New York. Crystal is asking about 9 patches. So I generally cut all my individual squares and then sew the 3 rows with 5 of one color and 4 of the other to make the checkerboard. And then it's up to you if you want to put a sashing strip or frame around each of those blocks to separate the 9 patches, or you can just sew the 9 patches all together in a quilt. If you want to make it a little bit faster, then you would do 3 strips together, long strips, and then subcut however big the squares are. So if you go way back in my channel to like the first year I was sharing tutorials, I think I have a 9 patch video on there. It's one of my favorite basic blocks. But one of my favorite books when I was young was by Lois Lowry, and she wrote the Gift, I think it was called, about, but that wasn't the one that I read. I read a different one about a girl who had extrasensory perception and like she could move things, and she got in trouble at school because she would like move the chalk and the eraser. And so it was a really, I wish I could remember. I remember the storylines. I don't remember the titles of these books, and then no one ever knows what I'm talking about. But so I am intrigued by the idea of that kind of paranormal, but not so much the ghosts and the haunting stuff. And I'm definitely not into the scary movies. Okay, so I've got 2/3 of my cactus there, and I will actually I should press to the dark generally works better, and then on this block it does, because those are all the long straight sides of my triangles. So they like to lay down and behave. This one. So who decorates for Halloween? I am such a lazy homemaker and mom. There's no way I would decorate for anything really. I admire all those ladies who, and I suppose there's men out there too, that really get their craftiness on and are making holiday themed cake pops and fancy lights on the house for every holiday. Okay, there we go. There's my skinny mini cactus for the Cotton Cuts bonus block, Floral States of America. So this will need a good pressing and trimming up, and then a border to make it even. Or I could just leave it skinny and fit it in somewhere on the back of my quilt. The other thing I talked about last week on my video when I was talking about these floral states was how I am labeling. I am writing each block name, the state that it represents, and the flower that's on the fabric with a micron pen right on the fabric. So I will have that record as we go along. Block of the month on my YouTube channel. I did a series last year, 2023, called The Little Bit Different Block of the Month. And I have a pattern coming out next year. The fabric won't be available until February, and it's a 7-month block of the month. So I will share some of that, and I will give links to the shops that are carrying the fabric so that you can, if you wanted to do it the same way. But I have those, I haven't done anything this year. It's intriguing to think of something for 2025, but like I said, I have this other pattern coming out in brick and mortar shops, so I don't want to steal their thunder. So I'll be sharing more about that in the future. But yeah, right now I'm just having fun with the Cotton Cuts kits for the 2 block of the month. I'm doing the Wild West Mystery quilt and the Floral States of America. So those are the two block of the month projects I've got going on right now. So I'm going to set that aside and then get to the other quilt along that I've been talking about over the last few weeks, which is the Woven Hearts. And you can see one of the other blocks up on the wall behind me, but I'm using the pattern from Fat Quarter Shop, and the link is down in the description below. These are called Woven Stars, and we're going to put bunches of these together to make a big heart. And I decided that I better get my tail in gear, trying to keep the language appropriate. I'm really falling behind on this. This is a very intense project for someone that has a full-time job that's not quilting. Because they want to do this Woven Hearts in 6 weeks, and I had the fabric ahead of time. I should have cheated and gotten started. But I'm going to put some rows together. So let's, I made these blocks ahead of time. I trimmed them to size, and we are just going to sew them into rows. And I've already cut my other fabric. I'm just deciding how I want to do this. Since there's 3 stars in this row, which is the right side, grunge. I'm using grunge this white grunge as my background fabric, and so it's very hard to tell what's right side and wrong side on that. And these woven stars are paper pieced, and you can go back. I've been working on these for a few weeks now, so you can go back and watch those videos for how that all comes together. But I leave the paper on until my blocks are in rows, bordered on all sides. And that's just my little quirk. I know there's some people that take the paper off early, but I just like to have a little more stability for as long as possible. So I'm going to line that star up with the background fabric and start letting this come together. So Fat Quarter Shop sells whole pads of the foundation papers. So that's really nice to have this big bundle of paper ready to go for your foundation paper piecing. Okay, so then, I'm doing this way so that I can chain piece my rows together. So if I have 3 stars in the middle of the 2 background strips, I sew 1 background on each star, and then I have the 3rd one in the middle, and I can just keep feeding it through. Like I said, so then I take this one out. And I've got my star in my background, and then I take the star that it's gonna be next to, and here's where we have to match up. They put registration dots on the papers, and that way you can get your stars lined up exactly and not cut off any star points. That's the hope anyway. We'll see how I do. It's always tough to ease fabric in and get it lined up. Like the top of this fabric is off. I may just sacrifice those star points a little bit for the sake of the blocks lining up on the edge. Like I said, it's hard. You don't have any give in the paper, so you can't ease anything in. Yeah, these stars are a lot of fun. You can do a lot of different fun layouts. We're going to have a heart eventually. Okay, and then I'm working from the bottom up, so I just have a single star to go in between these background fabrics on this last bit. So like I said, this is a 6-week sew along, and it's pretty informal. There's no real, do this step first kind of thing. So I was mentally dividing up all the, there we go. I got 2 of the stars together. Make sure I have the right length piece. So like I said, they did not give us a lot of guidance on, week 1, make 5 stars. But we need 70 stars for this quilt. And I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to get done by Thanksgiving, but we'll see. That's part of the reason why I started doing my Wednesday lives, is because it keeps me accountable and I can keep making progress. But when I did the math, to have a couple weeks to sew the rows together, I would have to be making like 4 blocks a day, and that's a lot of paper piecing. And I may break my own rules and tear off the paper ahead of time, because that's a lot going through my machine when I've got 2 stars together. When I'm just doing 1 star with paper next to the fabric, it's not too bad. But when you've got 2 pieces of paper and 2 layers of fabric, it gets a little hard to handle. But that's the great thing about quilting, is you can always perfect your technique on the next block. So there is 1 row. This is the Laguna Sunrise fabric collection. And while we're sitting here, I can start ripping out my papers. I'm starting from the center star, since that's pretty well. So when I start from the outside edge, and then I just pop my finger under the side of the fabric that the paper's been ripped off of. So I tore away the seam paper in the seam allowance, and then I just work my fingers in underneath that edge, and then I can rip along the stitches on the other side. And it's just like ripping paper out of a spiral notebook. Very, very satisfying to take those papers out. And then when you get to the last paper, this number 2 here, it just will pop right out of there, because it's all the other papers that were connected to it have been ripped off. So the tricky part is getting into some of the seam allowances, but I ripped off all the seam allowances before I sewed things together. So I did that part. And Survivor is on tonight, so I will be, I can rip paper off while I watch Survivor. I'm never on board with trends, because, Survivor's been around for 20 plus years, 25 years now. And I just started watching it in the last 2 years. I mean, I watched a couple seasons early on, but okay, yeah, that'll be fun. So I've got that project going on. Now I've got 2 rows complete, and I just need to get on track with some of the other blocks, the star blocks together. So we will continue that. Find my stack of pieces, and I am trying to make these scrappy. So I'm just looking here and making sure I don't have the same color fabric in those blocks. So this is a continual discussion of how do you sew random blocks? Do you honestly just take whatever piece comes next, or do you plan, do you have any rules? Like I just said, you can't have the same fabric touching. But, if it were truly random, then you would sometimes end up with the same fabrics in the block. So that one wasn't trimmed yet, so we can't use that guy. And somehow I ended up with like all the same colors are now in the block. Oh, but these aren't even trimmed. So I thought I was going to be able to keep sewing, and I really can't. So how many quilt projects do you have going at the moment? That's always a controversial subject. People don't want to admit I'm much more of a starter than a finisher. So we're all friends here. I've got dozens of quilt tops in a bin underneath my long arm because I long arm for customers and then don't get my own projects done. I've sewn several quilts of valor this year that are piling up. I haven't gotten them quilted yet. I started a project for Jelly Roll Day back in September and have about 12 blocks done. I was thinking I'd need like 50 some blocks for that quilt. So that's been set aside. My second quilt project ever, I started in 2004-ish. So we're going on 20 years. And it was an Eleanor Burns Underground Railroad quilt because I was teaching history and thought that would be a great quilt to have hanging in the classroom. I know the actual history is kind of fuzzy. We don't know if people just made up this legend of quilt blocks being used to guide slaves to freedom. But it makes a nice little historical fiction idea to think of people helping each other with codes. Anyway, I started that project and I probably only have 2 blocks left of the 12 that were in that pattern because they had curves and I wasn't ready to tackle curves. So yeah, these all need to, none of these are trimmed, so. So yeah, I've got lots and lots of quilt projects. The other craft that I tend to start things and never finish is knitting, because when I learned to quilt, my mother opened a fabric and yarn store. So I learned to quilt and knit around the same time as an adult because I was helping her out in her shop. So you need to be a little bit knowledgeable about the stuff you're selling. So I learned to quilt and knit. And I find knitting much more portable. I know there are people that do, English paper piecing and hand sewing things. That has never really appealed to me. But I'll start a knitting project and then set it aside for whatever reason. Quilt projects get in the way, life, all that kind of stuff. But I tend to start a knitting project if I'm going on vacation, because knitting is great to take on an airplane. So I need to have something pretty simple that's, straight garter stitch, just knit all the way through. And so a couple years ago, I guess it was just 1 year ago, last Thanksgiving, we were going out of town. So I wound up these balls of yarn that had been sitting around forever, and I cast on a cowl, a neck cowl, and knit a few, 3 or 4 inches maybe, and then set it aside. And last month I was traveling again. I put it in my carry bag and then didn't touch it. Decided to read on the airplane instead of knit. So I took it out this week and I was like, I don't really like the neck cowl pattern that I was using. So I ripped it all out, wound it up again, and was going to knit a diagonal scarf, really simple pattern to make the self-striping yarn looked really cool on the diagonal. But as I was knitting, I kept finding weak spots in the yarn and it would break. I think moths got into it or something. So I'm like, I shoved the whole project away. I was so irritated with it. And then I knew that I had another kind of half-finished scarf project. So I looked at that and same thing. It had some weak spots in the yarn. It was from the same company. And I'm, we don't have a exterminator service. I know some people do have people come spray for bugs all the time. We've just never bothered with that. So I'm sure they get into things, I've seen moths flying around our house occasionally over the years. So unfortunately, that's 2 projects that were sacrificed to the insects. But I did manage to find a fresh skein of yarn and a pattern that's pretty simple that I like. And I cast on during, I had a couple Zoom meetings today. So I started a brand new project when Whip Wednesday is all about finishing things up. So I kind of failed on that one, but we are making progress on these Woven Star foundation paper pieced blocks. And here is the very bottom row. We'll just have 1 star at the bottom tip of the heart. So I could I could rip off the paper on this one side and sew these rows together, and then I will feel like I'm well on my way for this quilt along that runs until November 19th, so almost to Thanksgiving. And if I get the quilt top done, it will be a miracle. But since I don't have a recipient, I'm going to find a cancer charity to donate this quilt to. So that will be, oops, take one more. Piece out of that. Did I do? Yes. Okay. Now I have to see if I can do this. You really should pin on a table and not out in thin air like I'm attempting to do here. Trying to get these seams lined up. But it's not. Okay, there we go. Matching up all these star points on these rows is gonna not be so much fun. Plus I want to make sure I've got paper ripped out of the seam allowances there, so do a little more ripping of paper so that we can make my life a little easier on the next step. So I'm just ripping the papers off along the edge where I'm going to stitch, and then it won't be as difficult to get all that out later. And if you have trouble getting into those seam allowances, just grab a pair of tweezers and use those to tug on the papers. I've got one bit of paper here that's I pinned right along there. We got it. And of course, paper is biodegradable, so it's not going to really hurt anything if it stays in your quilt. It just makes it a little stiff and crinkly. Okay, so I've got the papers out of that. Oh, I should pin this last. That's what I was waiting on. What's that? Seam there, trying to make them nest. That one doesn't have anything to connect to. Okay. So one long seam for this. project. Make sure my fabrics are still lined up. I get asked sometimes, what's your favorite part of quilting? And it's always choosing the fabric and putting blocks together. These sewing rows gets kind of tedious. And I have got some very bulky seams in this quilt. I will have to work on that in future rows and press seams open so that it reduces some of that bulk where those star points come together. Okay, we're past the matchy part, and I can just there's the center of the heart has like all the stars are you have to line up the stars. So I think instead of sewing those in long rows, I will do them as either 4-patch or 9-patch units. So that way you're only matching up, 2 or 3 sets of stars at a time, rather than a whole row of 10 stars that you have to pin every point to keep it lined up. Okay. Snip my chain piecing, and here is the very bottom of my heart. So that will just grow out from there as a pyramid, and then we'll make the top of the heart in a couple weeks. So I am going to say goodnight. Hope everybody has a wonderful week and makes lots of progress. And I'll see you back here next week for WIP Wednesday. Have a great evening.